I'm Daniel Bass, manager of the South Asia program at Cornell University.
And I'm Shavin Senavaratna, graduate student in architecture at Cornell and student worker at the South Asia program. Welcome back to the Next Monsoon podcast, where we examine how art and culture can help us navigate the uncertain future.
In Season 1, we introduced you to the scholars behind the Next Monsoon project, which culminated in a conference in October 2023 at Cornell. In Season 2, we'll be featuring interviews recorded during the conference alongside some snippets of conference presentations. You'll be hearing a diverse range of voices from 12 individuals practicing in academia, the arts, and activism, bringing a cumulative approach to understanding climate change in South Asia from diverse perspectives.
Our first guest is Llerena Searle, one of the discussants at the conference. Llerena shared with us a few presentations that caught her attention and how they represented the power of storytelling and speculation. Here's Llerena Searle.
Recording.
Sure. So I'm Llerena Searle, and I'm an associate professor of anthropology at the University of Rochester in New York.
Well, welcome to the Next Monsoon podcast.
Thanks.
So we want to ask, what have you thought of the conference so far?
It's been really fun. So my research directly on climate change in South Asia, I see it as sort of allied to the issues here. But given, given the reality of climate change and the frequency with which we're seeing its impacts, I know that my future research will be dealing with this. So I really came to the conference, as a way to understand the conversations that scholars are already having about this issue so that I can be better informed as I start to think about and plan my next research project. That said, there's a lot of resonances that I'm already seeing. I'm a discussant on a panel, and the thing that I saw in the papers, I think, relates to my current research anyway. It's like one of those things where maybe you just always see the same thing in things. But my past research has a lot to do with speculation and the circulation of stories and narratives in various forms, and tracing those stories and then thinking about the effects in the real world. So this was like speculation about real estate. And I see a lot of discussion here already about narrative, myth, stories. What kinds of stories are people telling about the environment and about climate change, and what kinds of counter narratives are possible? And those narratives can take the place of art or murals or poetry or protests, but really thinking in those terms of story and counter story is something that I see as a theme already, and as a theme that also resonates with the way that I have thought about kind of allied issues. The presentations that we just saw this morning, and of course I'm not certain, you have to edit in everybody's names. And then later in the conference, Kajri Jain's paper, which I'm commenting on, is really fantastic, as all of her work is. But she's looking at the site of this sculpture of unity in Gujarat, which is a giant sculpture, and around it is all these sort of touristic activities, gardens, zoos, visual exhibitions, etc. And she's really looking at them as a kind of collection of signs and how they tell a story that brings together the kind of Hindu religious and cosmological with the kind of modernist techno-developmental in a new, assemblage. And that's another kind of really, I think, fabulous example of the ways in which stories are being told. And here I think the story is very capacious. It's not just a narrative or a myth. It's bringing together exhibits and the people working at this tourist site, and the giant fiberglass butterflies and other things at the site, right?
Llerena also spoke of drawing inspiration from the work of Mabel Gergen, an assistant professor of Asian Studies at Vanderbilt University, who was one of the panelists at the conference. We'll be hearing more of Mabel's research on indigenous geopolitics in a later episode this season.
Here is Kajri Jain, professor of art history at the University of Toronto, presenting a portion of a research paper titled Après moi le déluge, Nature and as Statecraft at the Sardar Sarovar Dam, at the Next Monsoon Conference at Cornell this past October.
Version of adding the spice. One of my sites is Lucknow as the city of gardens and political monuments. An ashram in Mysore that holds world records for its bonsai garden and parrot garden and a few other things. An agricultural theme park in Kerala, and the tourist corridor around the Sardar Sarovar Dam on the Narmada River in Gujarat, also home to the Statue of Unity, the world's tallest statue, where multiple eco-themed attractions stretch for kilometers along the river and into the valley. And there's lots to be said about the corridor form, right, which is becoming a favored genre. So I'd like to use this last to briefly gesture at some of the patterns emerging from my fieldwork. So one is a kind of choreography of land that configures nature as a modality of ethical statecraft, drawing on a range of literary traditions and genealogies of park and garden making. Two is a signifying regime that places natural elements, organic, natural, living elements, on a continuum with inorganic representations, rendering inoperative the differences between symbolic forms and living entities, and hence obviating the burden of realism. And three, a contemporary assemblage of developmentalism and a retooled Brahminical cosmological hierarchy that unfolds in various modes: scientific, cosmological, primitivist, romantic, neo-spiritual. And there's a panoply of tools available here. So some super quick examples should provide a sense of what I mean. But first, a reminder that the Sardar Sarovar megadam displaced at least 40,000 families. NGOs estimate more like 85,000, mostly Adivasis from the Tadvi, Bhil, and Ratwa communities. Massive opposition from the Narmada Bachao Andolan, NBA, forced the World Bank to pull its funding. So while Nehru founded the dam in 1961, it wasn't inaugurated until 2017 by Modi. The engineering township of Kevadia, encroaching on 6 unsubmerged villages during the dam's construction, is now a tourism development hub, rebranded Ekta Nagar, Unity Town. This has meant ongoing Adivasi dispossession. The Narmada Nigam has been fencing off farmlands and erecting signs declaring ownership, including by stealth during the COVID lockdown. So everyone was in their houses, they came and put up the barbed wire fences. The dispossessed can't claim compensation because unsubmerged villages aren't covered by the resettlement plan. So this is a kind of another situation of what Rohit called in situ exile, right? Many are now employed by the Statue of Unity Authority, or mushrooming hotels and informal services as casual labor or on precarious short-term contracts. So these are not government jobs. They're in partnership, public-private. And they are subject to intense surveillance lest they reorganize, though now they're too few and fragmented and state power too unchecked for that to be feasible. Most of the tourist attractions here somehow relate to nature. Hiking, biking, rafting, or helicoptering along the river, Narmada Maha Aarti, the Dino Trail, zoo, pet zone, nutrition park, and many gardens. The Valley of Flowers, Ekta Nursery, Aapka Miyawaki Forest, Cactus Garden, Butterfly Garden, a yantra-shaped maze garden, and an Arogyavan that showcases Hindu wellness systems, celebrates yoga, and frames nature in terms of care for the human body and connecting with the soul, completely eliding local lifeways. Nature figures here as an at once national and global good via a spectrum of genres: scientific, cosmological, primitivist, romantic, and Disney-esque, taking on an ethical charge in excess of the science to naturalize and legitimate Modi's techno-sacred governmentality. And this resonates with Gyan Prakash's observation about colonial science, whose, quote, functioning as a technology of colonial governance and as an ideology of improvement overshadowed its representation as a body of universal laws of nature. Here, both colonial techniques and pre-colonial cosmologies are retooled for internal territorial penetration. The Kevadia jungle safari, for instance, has scientific descriptions like any other zoo and showcases local crocodiles after failed attempts to remove them for the safety of the seaplanes. But also, Australian emus and South American alpacas are creatively placed in the same grassy enclosure. The guide driving the eco-friendly electric golf buggy providing the safari experience called this an instance of peaceful coexistence. The alpacas love chasing the emus around the enclosure. It's unclear whether the emus actually enjoy this. This animal lesson echoes the Jataka and Panchatantra tales, the latter intended to teach princes the principles of statecraft or niti. Both also inform Arabic and Persian animal fables and the Mughal idea of rule as sulh-i-kul, or peace with all, a paradise of plenty manifested in paintings and actual gardens. So Modi and the Gujarat Forest Department, forest people, as Rohit called them, following Mayavati and others, trace a lineage to Mughal and Nawabi gardens, as well as to Victorian-era parks aimed at public health. Here, ethical and scientific aspects of nature coexist, ultimately reflecting the benevolent, all-encompassing wisdom of the sovereign. In this sense, these attractions aren't reducible to Disneyfication, or rather they help us to rethink Disneyfication beyond the secular commodification of space via reified culture. For Disney too uses nature in the service of moral and ethical pedagogy, like the fables of Aesop and La Fontaine. And as with Disney, this ethical and pedagogical charge needn't be transmitted through organic living beings. If the Glow Garden renders nature entirely inorganic through its fabricated light sculptures, this is just one pole of a blurring and oscillation between organic nature and its inorganic representation throughout Ekta Nagar. The figuration of life teeming in the gardens firmly eschews the simulacrum of a primordial wilderness divorced from culture or human intervention. Take the cactus garden, whose exterior wall features colorful fake cacti along with our host and benefactor. Entering through a cactus gate, you see artificial cacti cohabiting with organic ones, and fountains lined with dolphin tiles, or stairs with bird tiles flanked by photographic cacti. More cactus photos adorn the gift shop, whose concrete pillars feature tiles with photographic stones. You can be photographed with your face in a cactus or under a selfie caption with an image of the fake cactus entrance. This play of multi-layered representation continues in the zoomorphic topiary and the animal dustbins, now ubiquitous in Indian parks. Human anthropocentrism is a major ideological component of the destruction of life on the planet, but not the only one. Again, something scholars in the global north often overlook. It comes into assemblage with other forms of hierarchy and other kinds of enlightenment that may not center the human or do so in ways other than humanism. For instance, a Brahminical cosmology whose ordering of beings perpetuates what Mukul Sharma calls eco-casteism. This plays into the at once evolutionary, developmental, and cosmological framing of the area's Adivasi people throughout the tourist experience, and their erasure as the area's existing inhabitants, even as they're conscripted into staging its attractions. So all this serves to either consign them to a phantasmatic elsewhere or to conscript them into the developmental narrative of Ekta Nagar. Thus, the Statue of Unity Museum stages them alongside the area's flora and fauna on the one hand and developmentalist resettlement propaganda on the other. A series of before and after billboards at the Kevadia Jungle Safari celebrates the area's transformation from a dam site to an ecological wonderland. Doubtless the point was to celebrate the project's speedy progress from a dumping ground for debris from the dam, from construction in May 2019, to aviaries and animal enclosures in October. But the effect of this binary formulation of before and after is to erase entirely the question of what came before this before. Before the dam, before the deluge. First, the deluge of state-controlled water, and then of state-orchestrated land and life. Here, the sovereign's utterance, après moi le déluge, refers not what happens after he dies, but after he has risen. For this deluge is what he has unleashed. Thank you.
That was such a great presentation, and I was super interested in how Kajri started talking about nature and as an aesthetic in the theme park, like her example of the stone being this literal wallpaper of stone. Mm-hmm. That was really cool.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing that there's this like Disneyfication element to this space, these like certain theme zones and tourist activities. And unfortunately, it's even more powerful to see the visual slides that she had with her talk. She was, as a professor of art history, she had a lot of wonderful visuals. And if you go to the Next Monsoon website, which is linked in the show notes, you will be able to see the video of her talk and all her wonderful pictures.
That's it for today's episode of The Next Monsoon. Next time, we'll be talking to Farhan Karim, an architectural historian originally from Bangladesh, on his perspective of the conference and sharing urban planner and architect Rohit Mujumdar's presentation on architectures of exfoliation, unmaking urban lives and ecologies.
We would like to give special thanks to Sam Lubowitz and Angelica Kramer at Cornell's Language Resource Center for their assistance with recording this podcast. Shavin Senavaratna not only co-hosts this podcast, but is also our editor. South Asia Program Administrator Gloria Lemus-Chavez provided production supervision. Funding for this podcast and the entire Next Monsoon project comes from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Please follow the South Asia Program on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at SAP Cornell. You've been listening to music by Gloria Lemus-Chavez and her partner Brandon Kane. Make sure to check out more of their work in the description links below.
The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast do not reflect those of the National Endowment for the Humanities, Cornell's Office of the Vice Provost for International Affairs, or any other official entity of Cornell University.
I'm Daniel Bass.
And I'm Shavin Senavaratna.
Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode for new conversations and stories on The Next Monsoon.